Proverbs 16 through 18. Well, back in, I think it was the video on Psalm 133, we talked about 3 different words that are used to be translated as forgive in English. Again, all words in Hebrew, or most words, tend to have very picturesque thoughts behind them, and so how we translate words often is a matter of sometimes conjecture, but often we're having to see the picture that's being drawn in the mind, and then we use an English word that fits that idea the best. But when it comes to forgiveness, there is no actual Hebrew word for that word, but we have these word pictures. I think we had mentioned nasa means to lift, carry, or bear someone's burden, often translated forgive. Salach means to release, as in a debt, and kippur, the idea of covering something. The one that's used, this is in 17:9, Proverbs 17:9. He who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. So let's say there is a sin that is committed, and it's glaring between these two people. He who covers a transgression, the word is kasa. So this person covers it over. Kasa. Again, it's a very picturesque word. It's used, kasa, there's not very well written, but kasa is used in Genesis 7 to describe the water covering the earth during the flood. Exodus 8, the frogs covered the land in Egypt. Exodus 14, the Red Sea covered the Egyptians. Numbers 9, the cloud covered the tabernacle. So the word literally means to cover. So the word picture is really quite beautiful. In fact, we have another verse that we had back in Proverbs 10, verse 12. Love, same word, covers all sins. So as we've learned that relationships are very important to God, when wanting to love someone, sometimes the best thing to do is to literally cover over their sin. It shows again that forgiveness can be a very costly thing to the person doing the forgiving, because it's not easy to cover something that might be very obvious. So interesting choice of words. God covers our sins. In Psalm 32:1, blessed is he whose transgression is nasa, born, and whose sin is kasa. So God can do this for us, thus we ought to do it for others. I'd like to finish this video by answering a question that came up relating to something I had said. How are some sins worse than others? Doesn't James 2:10 argue that all sins are the same to God? We had said earlier that the book of Proverbs presumes that all sins are not the same. Well, James 2:10 in the New Testament says this: whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he is guilty of all. For he who says, do not commit adultery, also says, do not murder. In other words, you do one but not the other, and then you are a transgressor of the law. So the idea is, if you do one of the commandments, are you not breaking them all, showing that all sins are the same to God? Well, a quick response to that would be, first of all, common sense when it comes to any kind of relationship. I think we learn this in normal life. Certainly being married, certainly having a best friend, you realize that you can do some things to hurt them and you can do some things to really hurt them. So the idea of all sins not being the same, I think, begins with just the common sense of how relationships work. Secondly, the shame-honor idea of sin in the Old Testament, or really in the ancient Near Eastern world. Again, if that's the model that we're looking for when it comes to the issue of sin and guilt, that's much more able to be seen in shades and in depths and in kinds of sins, right? The shame and honor idea, as opposed to the idea of just guilt and innocence, which is really this model here, that you are doing one small, but you're guilty of the whole. So I think the shame and honor approach of the Eastern world that is reflected in the Bible would argue for all sins not being the same. Third, over the years I've just very unofficially kept track in the back of my Bible of this issue of all sins not being the same, and it's an interesting list of verses that, again, I've unofficially kept track of. Just listen to some of the wording. Genesis 18, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great because their sin is very grave. Exodus 32, Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them?" Exodus 32 again, Moses said, "These people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold." 1 Samuel 2, the sin of the young men was very great. 2 Kings 17, Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. 2 Chronicles 28, you intend to add to our sins and to our guilt, for our guilt is great. Job 34, he adds rebellion to his sin. Isaiah 30, woe to those who devise plans that they may add sin to sin. Jeremiah 9, for they proceed from evil to evil. Again, the idea there is sin to sin, evil to evil. They go beyond the normal almost and push the boundaries of how evil they are. Ezekiel 16, if that were too little, you became more corrupt than they in all your ways. Hosea 13, now they sin more and more. One more, Ezekiel 8, turn again, you will see greater abominations than these. So again, I think that if we go looking for the evidence of some sins being worse than others in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, and in establishing our story, I think it's pretty much there for anyone to see. And the last thing is, well, what about James 2:10? Well, the context of whoever keeps all the law and breaks one point breaks them all, the context of that question is not asking are all sins the same. What it's asking for, and we can tell by how that verse 11 goes, for he who said, right? That's the argument of James 2, verses 10 and 11. The argument is, or the question is, are all commands interconnected? That is the question. For he who said this also said this. And that answer is absolutely. The law was not put together by a committee. The law was given to us by one God who thus has all ideas together as one. And that answers that question. Does the law come from one mind? Yes. Therefore, to break one is to hurt the same God as breaking another. It's not answering really in context the question, are all sins the same? That would have to be determined from other evidence.